My name is Alana, and although inside I still feel like a girl who wants to laugh for no reason and dream of the impossible, I'm 25 years old, and my entire life has long been tied to stovetops, heavy pots, and the endless smell of garlic and oil. I work as a cook at Antonio's restaurant, a huge establishment where pots boil, knives clang, and every minute someone barks out orders as if the end of the world depended on how quickly they were fulfilled. I started there as a teenager, after finishing a year of courses at a local community college, because I couldn't afford a real university. My parents had no money, and there was nowhere to turn for help. So, while my former classmates were scattered to campuses across the country, I only considered short, inexpensive programs that would allow me to somehow escape into independent life. Cooking seemed like the most sensible choice to me. 1 year of study, a diploma in hand, and a chance to find a job where labor was always needed. When I first walked through the doors of Antonio's, I was trusted only to chop boxes of vegetables, scrub mountains of dirty dishes, and carry out every little task ordered by the cooks on the railway, where endless plates of pasta and meat were assembled along the line. Day after day, I came home exhausted, my fingers smelling of onions and my feet aching so much it seemed they would never stop hurting. But I stayed and clung on, because inside me there was a stubborn feeling. If I could just hold on, I would become a real cook. And I did. Years passed. I climbed the kitchen steps until I finally earned a white chef's uniform and the right to cook, not just carry out someone else's orders. It wasn't a glamorous job. I didn't stand under the spotlights of a TV show or decorate tiny plates with dots of sauce, but I had the stability I sorely missed at home. The truth is, I work more than one shift at Antonio's. My schedule is like a marathon with no finish line, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., then a short break to get home, change, and be back by 5 p.m., and then it's back to running until 11 p.m., or even later if the dining room is full and the kitchen is exploding with orders. I've gotten used to weekends existing only in my dreams, and vacation is a word from another world. One of my colleagues jokes, "Alana, it's easier for you to get a bed in the pantry than to go home." And I laugh, although deep down I'm not laughing, because I know I have no choice. I work so much not because I love the restaurant, even though it's become almost like a home to me, but because my family needs the money. My parents are still struggling with a mortgage they'd never be able to afford without my help. My father works part-time in construction, but his jobs are always intermittent, and my mother works the checkout line at the grocery store, and their salary barely covers the bare necessities. But that's not the worst of it. I have a younger sister, Jessica, and for her sake, I basically live in the kitchen. She's 20 now, in her second year at a state university in a neighboring state, living in a dorm there. All those tuition, books, and housing bills fall on our shoulders every month, which means my shifts, my tired hands, and my wallet. When Jessica first entered college, my parents told me point blank, "She's smart. She has a future, unlike you. You've already chosen your path. You went into cooking, and now it's your responsibility to help your sister." Their words burned me like someone had doused me with boiling water, but I didn't argue. I truly loved Jessie and wanted her to be able to escape to a place I'd never be. And if that meant frying meat, peeling potatoes, and handing over my paycheck from dawn to dusk, then so be it. For 2 years, I've been putting almost every dollar into Mom's hands so she can pay off her loans and cover her student loans. All I have left is a little bit, to fill up my ancient car, buy cheap groceries like pasta and bread, and sometimes have lunch at work if I'm lucky and someone makes an extra portion. That's my whole life. Restaurants, family, and the rare moments when I can indulge in a cup of coffee and some quiet. I've long since stopped buying new clothes for the sheer pleasure of it. Now I pull out old jeans and t-shirts until they're literally torn at the knees and shoulders. And only then do I allow myself to pop into a cheap store and buy something to replace them. I don't have any parties with friends or trips to cafes or those little joys that make life so special at 25, because my every move is tied to saving and every desire is met with the dry thought, the family needs this money. I live in the same tiny room I had in school, with the same double bed that creaks with every movement and a dresser whose drawers are about to fall apart. Sometimes I catch myself imagining a small apartment of my own, just me and the silence, where no one dictates how I spend my money. But then it all falls apart, because after paying for Jessica and the mortgage, I don't even have half the money left to even dream of my own place. Yes, I'm too tired to really think about it. When you're working 12, sometimes 13 hours a day, 6 days a week, you have neither the energy nor the space left to worry about your own circumstances. You live like a clockwork machine. Wake up, work, come home, shovel something simple like toast or a bowl of noodles into your mouth, fall onto your bed and close your eyes, only to start all over again in the morning. And so it goes on for years. Jessica rarely shows up home once a month, sometimes even less. And every time she comes, it feels like this house has become a foreign place to me, because all my attention immediately shifts to her. She immediately runs off to her friends from school, who are also coming home for the holidays, and only talks to me when she needs to ask for a little money for small things or complain about how hard school is. My parents blossom when she's here, their eyes sparkling, they laugh, asking dozens of questions. How are school days? Who are your new friends? What are your plans? I sit next to her and listen as if I'm not there. No one ever asks, "Alana, how's your job? How are you feeling after all these shifts?" As if my standing at the stove every day was so insignificant, it wasn't even worth mentioning. I'd gotten used to it. Over the past few years, I'd convinced myself that this was the way things were supposed to be, that I was doing the right thing by devoting my energy and youth to my family, that being a good daughter meant sacrificing myself, not complaining and not expecting gratitude. I thought it was my duty to help, even if no one asked how I was doing. But everything changed on Tuesday evening. I returned home from a double shift, covered in the smell of oil and smoked meats, barely able to stand, and saw my family sitting in the kitchen with Jessica. They were laughing, as if sharing some incredibly good news, and they looked happier than I'd seen them in a long time. I took off my coat, set my bag by the door, and said, "Hey, what's going on?" My voice sounded hoarse because exhaustion had squeezed everything out of me. Jessica looked up, grinned, and said, "Oh, Alana. I was just telling Mom and Dad that my 21st birthday is next week. I've decided to celebrate it at home instead of at university." I sighed and nodded. "Well, great. We could have a small dinner, just us, the family." I could already see myself setting the table, maybe baking a cake. The thought even warmed my heart. But then Mom suddenly broke into a wide smile and said, "Oh dear, Jessica has completely different plans. Her friends are coming here on Sunday, about 25 of them. We're going to have a real celebration." She even laughed, as if it were the most wonderful news in the world. Then she added, "You need to be prepared, Alana. You need to prepare everything for the guests. Feed them, then clean up, and please try to be welcoming, smile, and pretend you're enjoying it." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It was so unexpected. I had my only day off, the only day I could just sleep in until lunch, or at least sit with a cup of coffee in silence. And they were going to turn it into another shift, this time in the kitchen of my own home. I froze, not believing what I was hearing, and slowly said, "No, I don't agree." But the words had barely left my lips when Jessica jumped up from her chair and screamed, "You're selfish, Alana. You never loved me. You're trying to ruin my birthday." Her voice trembled, her eyes blazing with anger, and I stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling my insides twist, because in that moment I suddenly realized, to them, I was just someone who was obligated to always work, always help, and never say no. My father's voice was stern and so cold that an unpleasant chill ran down my spine. "Alana, you will do what we tell you." I exhaled and, trying not to lose my temper, said, "If Jessica wants a real celebration, let her go and have it at a restaurant." My mother immediately laughed, not cheerfully, but with a condescending tone, as if I had just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. "Oh dear, we don't have the money for a restaurant." But if you can talk to your boss and convince him to cover everything for free, then of course we'll do it at a restaurant." I felt something inside me snap, and gritting my teeth, I replied, "My boss won't work at a loss. You'll have to pay anyway." And at that moment, the smile disappeared from my mother's face, and her voice became firm. "Then you only have two options, Alana. Either you find the money for Jessica's restaurant, or you cook and clean here for all her friends." I couldn't believe my ears. The one who'd been shouldering their mortgage for so many years, paying for Jessica's education, bringing home almost every penny of my salary, now heard them tell me I was selfish and ungrateful. And now they wanted to turn my only day off into waitressing and cooking for a party of 25. I felt anger rising in my throat, but I didn't have the strength to scream like Jessica. Instead, I simply turned and slowly walked upstairs to my room, closing the door behind me and turning the lock. I sat on the edge of my creaky bed and stared at the wall, trying to somehow collect my thoughts. But all that was left in my head was a continuous buzzing, as if someone had hit me with something heavy. It felt like I'd been sitting there for hours, though it was probably less. It had become quiet downstairs, but I could hear the muffled voices of my parents and Jessica discussing something. Occasionally, my sister's voice would suddenly rise, and I realized she was still complaining that I was trying to ruin her holiday. The longer I sat, the deeper I withdrew within myself, and the feeling was strange. I wasn't angry, I wasn't seething, but rather, I seemed to be sinking somewhere down, into a cold void. There was only sadness and confusion, and in that silence, I suddenly realized clearly my family had never seen me as a person with dreams, desires, or fatigue. They only saw me as a source of money and a worker, a human ATM machine, who, as a bonus, knew how to cook and clean. I thought of all the envelopes and bills I'd given my mother over the years. I quickly did the math in my head and came up with a staggering sum, more than $50,000. It was the kind of money I could have used to buy my own apartment, or at least save up for the education I dreamed of. But instead, I was still sleeping in my childhood bedroom, working myself to the bone, and being told I had to spend my only day off catering someone else's party. And it was at that moment that I remembered what Sarah had told me a few weeks ago. Sarah works as a waitress at Antonio's, and we've become close over the years because she was one of the few who knew the truth about my life. She never hesitated to say directly what I was afraid to say out loud. "Alana, your family is using you. They take everything you earn and don't even think about what you need. That's not love. That's not support. Families shouldn't be like that." I always tried to justify it by saying, "That's just the way it is, and I'm okay with it." But Sarah would just shake her head and repeat, "No, you're not okay with it. You're just afraid to admit it." A few weeks ago, she mentioned that her roommate was moving out, the lease was ending, and she urgently needed someone to share the expenses. At the time, I just smiled and said I didn't know anyone suitable. But now, sitting on my bed, with a dim lamp overhead and listening to the muffled laughter from below, I thought for the first time, maybe that person could be me? I picked up the phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking as if I'd just run out of freezing air, and dialed Sarah's number. She answered quickly on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Hi, Alana, how are you? You seem upset." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh and said, "I really am." And then it all came pouring out. I told her about what had happened in the kitchen, about my father's cold voice, about my mother's laughter, about how I had once again been made responsible for someone else's happiness. Sarah listened silently. All I could hear was her heavy breathing and the occasional short, angry noise, as if she wanted to interrupt but was holding back. When I finished, she said firmly, "That's it. You're moving in with me. I mean it, Alana. This has gone too far." I froze, clutching the phone tighter than necessary. "You really think so?" "You really mean it?" I asked. Sarah almost laughed, but there was determination in her voice. "Of course. I've been telling you for months that you need to leave. Your family treats you like a servant, and they pay you for the privilege of being their servant. Just think how much money you'll have once you're no longer supporting 3 adults. You'll easily be able to pay your share of the rent, and you'll have enough left over to finally live for yourself." We talked for about 20 more minutes, discussing every detail. Sarah explained that her apartment was a 2-bedroom, just 15 minutes drive from Antonio's, and that the rent would be split evenly. She added, "You can move in whenever you want." I took a deep breath and asked, "What about tomorrow morning?" "I have the day off today, and I don't think I can stay in this house much longer." "Perfect," she replied immediately. "I'll wait for you." When I hung up, my heart was pounding as if I'd just jumped into cold water. It was a new feeling, forgotten for years. I was excited. For the first time in a long time, I was about to take a step for myself, not for others. I spent the rest of the evening in my room, carefully packing my things. I didn't have much: clothes, a few tattered books, a couple of pieces of jewelry, and a few personal items that were meaningful to me. Everything fit easily into 3 cardboard boxes found in the basement. I tried to move quietly so that not a single floorboard creaked, because I needed to hide from my family that I was getting ready to leave. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone knocked softly on my door, and I immediately recognized the voice. "Alana, it's me." "Can we talk?" It was Mom. I replied wearily, "Mom, I'm really tired." "Maybe tomorrow?" But she persisted. "I need you to stop acting like a child and start thinking about how to give your sister the best birthday ever. This is important, Alana." I lay in the dark and smiled to myself, bitterly but understandingly. She truly had no idea what I had already decided. I said out loud, "Okay, Mom. Good night." Hearing her footsteps retreating down the hall, I finished packing and hid the boxes in the closet so no one would notice them in the morning. That night, sleep never came. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I had to do. Fear crept closer. What if I made a mistake? What if my family really needed me and I would be selfish if I left? But then I remembered Sarah's words. "They're using you like an ATM." I saw Jessica yelling at me, accusing me of being selfish for not wanting to waste my only day off serving her friends. And I remembered my parents calling me ungrateful, even though I'd kept their house afloat for 6 years. By morning, I had no more doubts. I knew I was doing the right thing, even if it was a scary one. I got up very early, around 6 in the morning, when the house was quiet and everyone else was still asleep, and began quietly carrying my things out to the car, one box at a time. The house was so quiet that it seemed to sigh with relief at my departure, and trying not to think it was real, I placed the set of keys on the kitchen table, lingered on the cold surface, and not allowing myself to turn around, walked out to the car. The door slammed behind me, and with that sound, it was as if the thread that had trapped me for so many years had snapped. I started the engine and drove forward, not allowing myself even a glance in the rearview mirror, because I knew that if I looked back, I might become entangled in doubt and stop. When I arrived at Sarah's apartment, she was already waiting for me with 2 mugs of hot coffee and a wide smile that immediately warmed my heart, like sunshine on a cold day. We both carried the boxes upstairs, and the morning flew by in a flurry of activity. Together, we organized my books on the shelves, hung my clothes in the closet, debated whether to put the dresser closer to the window or the door, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was helping to create a space that truly belonged to me. "So, what does it feel like to be free?" Sarah asked as I closed the last drawer. I took a deep breath and admitted, "Scary, but also good. Real good." To celebrate my move, we ordered sushi at a nearby restaurant, opened a couple of beers, and sat on the floor, laughing and chatting as if we were having our own little celebration. I felt like for the first time in years, I was doing something not because someone else demanded it, but because I wanted to. It was around 2 p.m. when my phone rang. Mom appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, Dad called, then Jessica, then Mom again. I didn't answer any of them. Sarah glanced at my phone, which was still vibrating, and said, "I think they already checked your room and found it empty." I smiled. "Okay. Let them panic for a while." I opened my messages and saw a long list of missed calls and voicemails. The first few sounded confused. "Alana, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" Then my mother's voice grew more worried. "Alana, your room is empty." "What's going on?" My father's voice was harsh. "Alana, you need to come home immediately. We need to discuss Jessica's party." And Jessica left a message full of hurt. "Alana, I can't believe you're doing this to me. My birthday is in 5 days. I showed these messages to Sarah, and she just shook her head. Look," she said, "even when they're panicking, they only think about themselves. Your mother doesn't ask if you're okay. Your father demands we discuss the party, and your sister is only concerned about her own celebration. None of them thought anything could have happened to you." She was right. There was a truth in every word that made my heart ache. They didn't ask once if I was alive, if I was well, or if I needed help. Their anxiety wasn't about my fate, but about the fact that their usual plans were falling apart. I decided not to answer. Let them worry. Let them feel what it means to be without someone they've taken for granted for so many years. The next day was Monday, and I went to work at the restaurant as usual. The morning began normally. I was washing vegetables, chopping onions and carrots, trying to distract myself from thoughts of yesterday, when the kitchen door swung open and Mr. Antonio appeared. He looked a little tense and said, "Alana, your parents are here. They want to talk to you." My stomach sank, as if someone had suddenly doused me with ice water. Of course they knew where to find me. They knew the restaurant was like a second home to me, and that I was here almost every day. "Should I talk to them?" I asked, trying to sound confident. "I don't have to," Mr. Antonio said softly, "but they look very upset. Maybe we should clear this up." I took a deep breath and followed him into the dining room. My parents sat at a corner table, their faces stony, their eyes filled with anger and tension. Mr. Antonio, realizing this wasn't going to be an easy conversation, led us into his office and closed the door behind him. Before I could even sit down, my mother practically pounced on me, saying, "What are you doing, Alana? Jessica's birthday is in 4 days, and you disappear like that." I looked at her calmly and said, "I moved out." My father frowned and asked, as if he didn't believe me, "You moved out? What does that mean?" I replied firmly, "It means I'm no longer living at your place." "I have my own apartment now." My mother flushed. Her face flushed red, and her voice trembled with indignation. "This is ridiculous. You have to come home right now. Jessica's friends are coming over on Sunday, and you have to clean the house and plan the menu for the party." I couldn't help but burst out laughing, a harsh, almost hysterical laugh. "Do you seriously think I left home just to work for you even harder?" I said, looking her straight in the eye. "You really don't understand that?" My father frowned, his confusion almost palpable. "Then what's the matter?" I raised my head and spoke with a firmness I'd probably never heard before. "The matter is, I've decided to take control of my life. I'm not giving you any more money. I'm not paying your mortgage. I'm not paying for Jessica's education." In that instant, the blood drained from their faces. My mother clutched her chest convulsively, as if her heart was pounding, and her voice broke into a whisper. "You can't do this to us. We depend on this money." I felt a wave of cold determination rise within me and said, "You should have thought of this before treating me like some servant you could take advantage of. Do you even realize I've given you over $50,000 over the last 2 years? Mom snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "Don't be so greedy and don't count your money. It's disgusting." I couldn't bear her accusations any longer and stood up abruptly. "I'm not going to listen to your lectures anymore," I said. "I've moved and I'm not coming back. From now on, you pay your own way. And if Jessica wants to finish college, let her find a job and pay for it herself." I walked to the door and opened it, feeling their eyes on me. "It's time for you to leave." "And don't come to my work anymore," I said firmly, without turning around. Mom cried out, "Wait, we're not done yet." But at that moment, Mr. Antonio appeared in the doorway, and I could tell from his expression that he had heard at least part of our conversation. "Is everything okay, Alana?" he asked, looking between me and my parents. I nodded cautiously. Yes, Mr. Antonio. My parents were just leaving. Actually, we're not finished yet, Mom persisted, but Mr. Antonio entered the office and said firmly, I think you were just finished. This is a commercial space, not a family counseling center. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. They didn't move, and then Mr. Antonio turned to the door and called for the security guards. Please escort these people out of the restaurant and don't let them back in. My parents stood up indignantly, Mom whispering something angrily, Dad breathing heavily, but under the guards' gazes, they slowly walked out. When the door closed behind them, Mr. Antonio looked at me with gentle concern. Are you okay, baby? I exhaled deeply and replied, Yes, I think I am. He nodded. Family matters are tough, but you have to remember, you can't let anyone walk all over you, even if it's your parents. I worked the rest of my shift almost automatically, feeling the fatigue growing heavier with each passing minute. But underneath it, deep down, a feeling of incredible relief simmered. The confrontation had happened, the words had been spoken, and now I knew there was no turning back. When I returned to Sarah's house, the first thing I did was check my phone. 17 missed calls and dozens of messages lit up the screen. They were begging me to come back, assuring me that everything could be discussed, that Jessica would understand if I couldn't help with the party. Sarah, seeing my face, asked, So, what's going on? I handed her the phone, and she scrolled through the messages and shook her head. See? They still don't understand. They think it's about the party. I smiled wearily. I know, but I think it's time to make it clear to them that it's not about that at all. I opened my banking app, my fingers shaking slightly but my heart beating steadily. I canceled all the automatic transfers, my parents' mortgage, Jessica's tuition, the utility bills. Everything that had been debited from my account for years disappeared in one move. Then I called Jessica's college and told them I would no longer be paying for her tuition and that they would now have to deal directly with my parents. When I finished all those calls and closed my phone, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since high school, my money was truly mine. I sat on the couch next to Sarah, and the excitement still throbbed inside me. But this was a different feeling. Not fear, but true freedom. But my family wasn't going to give in so easily. The next few days turned into an endless stream of calls and messages, as if my parents and sister had laid siege to my new, fragile peace. And every time I saw their number on my phone, I was overcome with a mixture of irritation and pity. At first, they tried to pull at my heartstrings, repeating how much they missed me, how they couldn't cope without me, how they needed me right now when everything was falling apart. I read these words and felt that they lacked genuine concern for me. It was just another attempt to drag me back into the familiar role of always being there for me, always ready to sacrifice myself. When their pleas for love didn't work, they changed their tactics and began bargaining, as if I were a thing to be coaxed with bonuses. They promised I wouldn't have to help at Jessica's party, that I could just come and be a guest. In one message, my mother wrote, "Alana, you can be the guest of honor. You won't have to do anything." I showed this to Sarah, and she rolled her eyes so dramatically that we both burst out laughing. "Guest of honor," she snorted. "Does that mean sitting and watching a bunch of teenagers eat food you didn't buy?" What an honor. I laughed louder, and with it, the last ounce of doubt vanished from me. I didn't answer my mother. Instead, I opened my phone settings and blocked all their numbers. I was tired of hearing their voices over and over again, reading these endless attempts to drag me back to a place where I'd long felt cramped and hurt. 2 weeks passed, and those 2 weeks were the quietest and most peaceful I'd felt in years. No one demanded my money, no one piled on my to-do lists, and no one manipulated me with guilt. I continued to work my regular shifts at Antonio's, but now that I didn't have to support 3 other adults, I no longer saw the point in exhausting myself with double shifts. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to take weekends and use them for myself, for relaxation, for life. Sarah and I were doing better financially than I could have expected. We were paying rent and groceries without a problem, and I even had some left over for the little pleasures I'd been depriving myself of for years. I bought a couple of new dresses, we went out to a restaurant, and one evening we even talked about maybe saving up for a short vacation. The thought seemed so incredible that I savored it for a long time, as if for the first time I was allowing myself to dream of something easy and pleasant. But one afternoon while I was at work, my phone rang, and the name of Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, appeared on the screen. My heart sank. At first I wanted to ignore it, thinking her parents had talked her into calling me to play a new hand. But curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up anyway. Linda spoke quickly and excitedly. "Alana, can we meet and talk? It's important." I hesitated, but agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown after my shift. When I arrived, Linda was already seated at a table, her half-drunk latte cooling in front of her, her face tense and tired. "Your mother told me everything," she began without any greeting, barely having time to sit down. "She said you abandoned them, and now they're desperate, needing money." I clasped my hands and asked, "Did she tell you why I left?" Linda frowned. "She said you were upset because you had to help with Jessica's birthday party." These words cut like a knife through my heart, and I suddenly felt I couldn't keep silent any longer. I spent the next 20 minutes talking non-stop, pouring out the truth. How I'd supported the entire family for 6 years, how I'd spent my salary on their mortgage and Jessica's education, how every rare day off had been a drudgery, and how they expected me to cater a party for 25 people instead of just living for myself. Linda listened silently, but I could see in her eyes that my words were passing her by, not truly touching her. When I trailed off, she merely shook her head. "Alana, I understand you're upset, but families are supposed to help each other. Your parents raised you, and now they need your support." I felt anger boiling inside me, but I replied calmly, "I'm not going to support people who treat me like I'm worthless. They don't care about my life or my needs." Linda frowned and said, "But they're having a hard time right now. Your dad had to take a second job, your mom works part-time at a grocery store, and Jessica had to take a leave of absence because they can't pay for her education anymore." I gritted my teeth and said calmly, "That's their problem. I'm not responsible for everyone else's lives." Linda's face flushed and she raised her voice. "I can't believe how selfish you are. If you're going to act like this, then I don't want anything to do with you either." I held her gaze and replied quietly but firmly, "It's your choice. But I won't change my mind." She jumped up from her chair, her coat nearly knocking the cup off the edge of the table. Without saying goodbye, she stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving me amid the smell of coffee and the chatter of others. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty, only tired and free. I sat in that coffee shop for a few more minutes, warming my palms on the warm mug, feeling the coffee gradually cool and my thoughts become clearer. Linda's words were rebuked, but for the first time, there was a hint of truth behind them. My parents had indeed started working to pay the bills, and Jessica had taken a break from school, perhaps for the first time in her life, learning how to earn money herself. Deep down, I felt a twinge of guilt, as if I'd betrayed them by leaving them to face reality alone. But far more powerful was my relief, knowing they were finally taking responsibility for their own lives, instead of dumping it on my shoulders time and again. Several months had passed since then, and news of the family reached me either from distant relatives or from mutual friends, who, as often happens, loved to discuss the fates of others. I was told that my parents were managing to pay the mortgage, although they were both now working much more and were more tired than ever before. Jessica got a job at a retail store, moved back into her parents' house to save on rent, and is now saving up to continue her studies next year. While these stories might have sounded sad to some, I saw them as steps toward maturity and independence, which I'd been waiting for them to achieve for years. Relatives and friends reacted differently. Some judged me, whispering that I'd abandoned my family, that I had a heart of stone. Others, especially those younger and already experiencing family pressure, supported me, telling me I'd done the right thing, that I'd finally set a boundary. One day, my cousin Mark said, "You shouldn't feel guilty for standing up for yourself, Alana. Your family was taking advantage of you, and you finally stopped it." I remember those words especially well because they confirmed that I wasn't alone in my choice, that someone actually understood what I was going through. Now, when I'm criticized for what I've done, I no longer make excuses or explain every detail in lengthy speeches, but simply say calmly, "I decided to take control of my life, and I don't feel guilty." I lived for 6 years fully providing for my family, allowing them to treat me like a second-class citizen, and that was more than enough. Now I live differently. My life has changed so much that sometimes I surprise myself. I still share an apartment with Sarah, and we get along wonderfully. We split the expenses equally, cook dinners together, chat in the evenings, and yet I have more money left over each month than I did in all my previous years. Last month, Mr. Antonio told me he planned to promote me to head chef, and the news felt like a sign that I was finally moving forward, building a career, and not just slaving away for the needs of others. The promotion means more responsibility and a significant pay increase, and for the first time, I'm looking forward to it with joy, because I know I'll be working for myself and my future. I'm determined. No more endless double shifts, unless something urgent comes up. I want time for myself to take cooking classes, improve the skills I've long dreamed of, or just sit in the evening with a book and a cup of tea, enjoying the freedom I've finally allowed myself. And most of all, I'm excited about the thought that next month I'll be going on my first real vacation in over 5 years. Sarah and I are planning a long weekend trip to the coast, and while it won't be a luxurious trip, it will be my choice, my joy, my small victory over the life I've always lived for others. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. I'd probably still be living in my childhood bedroom, working double shifts and giving it my all, and right now I'd be cooking and cleaning for Jessica's 21st birthday party, while everyone around me would take it for granted, and then they'd expect me to do the same next year, and the year after that. But I left, and I don't regret it one bit. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself, not to live up to other people's expectations. It took me 25 years to understand this simple truth. I deserve my own life. And even though the road to this was difficult, filled with tears, sleepless nights, and despair, I'm happy that I finally realized this and chose myself.